So the first question is, I want to talk about the title of this. The title of this is called, You Can Be a Hero, How Your Food Choices Impact Climate Change, Natural Resource Depletion, Antibiotic-Resistant Bacteria, Treatment of Animals, Extinction of Nature, Water Shortages in the Environment. Did we get carried away and exaggerate just for marketing purposes? I mean, it seems a little like outrageous that I'm saying here that your food, what you're going to eat for lunch or dinner, would have a real effect. So was this just marketing to get people to come to your panel, or are we being serious that your food choices are really making a difference in some of these incredibly important health and environmental issues?
Well, I suppose you know your marketing intentions better than I do, but if you were just trying to market, you got lucky because that's all true. What we eat has an enormous impact. It sends out ripples that impact our own health, that impact our economy, that impact our environment, that impact animals, that impact people and ecosystems all over the world. What you eat is super personal. It literally becomes you. But it's also very political. It impacts farm workers. It impacts animals and families and whether or not people have the means to feed their own families. Whether it's the chocolate industry, which, over half the world's chocolate comes from the Ivory Coast and Ghana, West Africa, where children are enslaved, where the average farmer growing chocolate is paid $1 a day. And when we participate by buying chocolate from Nestle and Mars and Hershey's and the other big chocolate companies from West Africa, we're actually supporting an industry that is profiting at the expense of some of the poorest people on the planet. Or whether it's the factory farming industry, which has epidemic rates of PTSD. People who are in these industries don't take these jobs because they like bashing in the brains of animals all day long. They take them because they're trying to survive. But essentially, we have the blood on our hands too when we, as a consumer, purchase these products. Whether it's farm workers who are dying in the fields of pesticide exposure. So I like to illumine the reality that our food choices have these huge impacts, because I believe that deep down almost everybody cares and wants to be a part of something positive on this planet. Nobody likes to feel like their hands are on the chainsaw that's cutting down the rainforest. And when we realize what's really at stake, we realize how powerful we are, that every bite we take is a vote for a healthier world. So yes, I think it is that big and bigger than you're saying in the title.
And there's actually, I think, no way to understate the devastating impact of animal agriculture on our planet, on our society, on our physical health, on our, as I've said today, our psychological health, our spiritual and ethical health. And I'm so grateful, really, to you, Steve, for working so hard to create a context for us to address these issues, because the mass media is not going to address these issues, because the advertisers, the big pharmaceutical industries and chemical industries and the fast food industries and the petroleum industries and the weapons manufacturers and so forth, the underlying profits and the banking industry, of course, in the background, really are dependent on us not questioning animal agriculture. The important thing, I think, to understand is that we have animal agriculture being really the most powerfully destructive activity that human beings engage in terms of what we're doing to rainforests and oceans and all the things that you mentioned, Steve, the overfishing of the oceans, the destruction of rainforests, and the complete destruction of aquifers and soil and so forth. And beyond that, as Ocean mentioned, the workers who are so harmed, and our own physical health, and diabetes and osteoporosis and liver disease and kidney disease and cancer and diabetes, all these are directly related to diets high in animal-based foods, which we understand now more and more clearly. But what I want to emphasize continually is what animal agriculture does to the inner landscape of our consciousness. I think this is something that's really important to understand, that if I'm taking out my wallet and paying for people to abuse animals and for the destruction that's happening to ecosystems, there's an underlying yearning to not understand that, to disconnect from that. And this mentality of disconnectedness, of just basically pretending that I can commit acts of violence towards other beings and that it has no repercussions. This is the big problem, and it reduces our intelligence as a society to a massive degree, and I think it explains why we can have so many apparently intelligent people working in ways to destroy our life together, while we have science and technology that are churning out more and more toxic chemicals, more powerful weapons, more systems of mass enslavement of humanity in various ways. And it's really incumbent on us, I think, to awaken the sacred feminine dimension of consciousness within ourselves that yearns to care for life, that yearns to protect the interconnected web of life, and that understands that we're all interconnected, that all living beings are interconnected, that our welfare is interconnected. And as soon as I take out my wallet and pay for someone to stab animals or impregnate them against their will on rape racks and steal their babies and kill their babies and then actually eat that stuff and feed it to my children, what it's doing is it's just creating a momentum of violence that keeps building. And as it builds and builds, we get greater violent manifestations of this violence in terms of weapons and diseases and inequality and injustice, because the underlying message of animal agriculture is one of privilege and elitism, that certain beings are superior, that's us, and other beings are inferior, and it's totally fine for the superior beings to dominate and exploit the superior beings to dominate and exploit the inferior beings. And so I think when we look deeply, we see that animal agriculture is the most devastating activity to the outer world of our environment and our society and our physical health. But even more importantly, what it really does that's so damaging is that it reduces our capacities to deal effectively with these problems. It reduces our intelligence, our emotional and cognitive awareness and ability to make connections. And so really what we're seeing, and I'm so glad, is we're seeing a tremendous momentum building of people questioning the food system and questioning the violence that we're committing towards animals and future generations and hungry people and slaughterhouse workers and wildlife on every level, and our own organs. And as we do that and share this message with other people, then we can be, I think as Steve is saying here, we can be heroes. Each one of us really can be heroes because these ideas we're talking about are not just abstract intellectual concepts. We're talking about the life on this earth. For us and for our children, there's nothing more urgent and more critical for us to make an effort to understand and to bring our lives into alignment with and to share with other people as skillfully as we can the impacts, the consequences of animal agriculture and the mentality of domination and exploitation of other beings that is basically we've inherited. It's not our fault, it's just what's here when we got here. We're born into it. And so we've all been wounded by it. And so there's no point in blaming or criticizing or shaming anyone, really. We've all been wounded. The whole idea, I think, is to heal ourselves and help others to heal. And I think as we do that, we are creating the awakening and the healing that needs to happen. And that, I think, is the heroism that's involved. And I think it really is a certain quality of heroism because we risk a lot by expressing ourselves honestly in this society. There's a lot of people that don't want to hear this message, that there's a lot of powerful forces that make a lot of money on violence and disease. So for us to stand up and express ourselves and to create communities of love and healing is truly, it's a very heroic thing. So I think it's a very good title. Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks.
One of the joys of being on a panel like this is that you have people who come from very different backgrounds talking about things, and you discover that there may be overlap in their work in ways they didn't expect. My background is that I'm a physician, and I am a professor at a medical school. But I'm at root, what I am is a scientist. And what I spend a lot of time doing is looking for phenomena in our natural world and trying to explain it. And my expertise is in superbugs. And one of the interesting things I found is that these superbugs, drug-resistant microbes, are popping up in places that we never expected them to. And some of those relate to the foods that we eat. I grew up in Florida, where the orange groves are really important to the economy. And it turned out that we're seeing more and more superbugs in the soil surrounding these orange groves. Now, why would that be? Turns out that we're pumping these orange groves full of antibiotics that were once designed to treat syphilis and tuberculosis. This was a front-page story in the New York Times. Why would that be? Well, it protects the crops. And I'm going to introduce you to some places where we're going to find problematic use of antibiotics pertaining to food choices. And what I have found in my research and what I write about is that whenever you hear about something like this that doesn't make sense, there's usually a very powerful lobbying group behind it that's making sure that it keeps happening. And so the idea that you can be a hero, well, what you can do is educate yourself and become an advocate. And I don't want to freak people out or talk about too many things to stress you out. I mean, you got to eat something. But talking about things that we know we could do a better job with. You know, another aspect of this is meat-producing animals, chickens, pigs, livestock. We have been pumping them full of antibiotics, not just because it makes them healthier, but it actually makes the meat on the bones bigger. And there's a very powerful lobbying group behind that we, a group that I was a part of, was able to take on and was able to limit the amount of antibiotics that we give to these animals. And we've seen a dramatic decrease in the number of superbugs associated with these animals. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and I want to make sure we have time to talk about all the different ways that these superbugs form, but the gist of it is that any time a bacterium is exposed to an antibiotic, it can evolve, it can mutate. Some of the bacteria will die, but some will survive, and when they survive, they can come back stronger, and they can be difficult to treat. And just to hit on one thing that's in the headlines now that has to do with our food choices, some of you have heard of this Wuhan virus, this novel coronavirus that's causing the stock market to go haywire and people are quarantined, 50 million people. Well, that originated in a meat market in China. I've traveled the world studying some of the most deadly viruses, including Ebola virus and Nipah virus, and many of these, between human outbreaks, we try to figure out where do they go. I talked about this afternoon. Ebola virus will kill 300 people, 3,000 people, and then it will disappear for 30 years. Well, where does it go? Turns out that it lives in bats, as do many other dangerous viruses. And if you find yourself in a Chinese meat market and someone offers you bat soup, you should think twice about it. That's where we think that this most recent outbreak happened, that there are animals that harbor all kinds of pathogens that I end up seeing in my clinic or in my emergency room because people took an adventurous tour to eat some unusual foods. I'm not a dietitian, I'm not an expert in nutrition, but I have a lot of thoughts about how antibiotics and about how big pharma contributes to some of the deadly pathogens that I see when people come into my emergency room asking for help. So I don't think you've overstated the aims of this. If people could walk away more informed about food choices and become advocates, I think that is an act of heroism, so absolutely.